So, it seems like Rachel Zegler's career is coming to an end, and it's all her fault. The release of Snow White was supposed to turn her into an even bigger star, but instead, Hollywood has started canceling her left and right. Turns out, her casting in Snow White was the first wrong decision. Here's the scene. It was June 2021, and Disney had announced that Rachel Zegler had been cast as Snow White. Almost instantly, the internet started spiraling. People were side-eyeing the choice because, well, traditionally, Snow White was described as having skin as white as snow.
This is not, needless to say, the original story behind Snow White's name. In the original fairy tale, she is named Snow White because she has white skin. That is what the name refers to. She has skin as white as snow. That's why she's named Snow White.
And there was Rachel, who proudly represented her Latina roots. But while everyone was busy losing it, Rachel clapped back. She basically told everyone to calm down because Snow White was beloved all over the world, including in Spanish-speaking countries. Now here's where it got even juicier. Fast forward to August 2023, and we found out that Rachel wasn't the only Latina being considered for the role. Another actress named Renata Vaca had actually been one of the final two contenders. So, the top two finalists for Snow White were both Latinas. Renata later spilled some behind-the-scenes tea, saying the casting call hadn't even been limited to a certain look or ethnicity. All they had asked for at the beginning was a Disney princess song. So basically, it came down to who could carry a tune and bring the magic, and apparently, Rachel had won the race. But wait, you're gonna love this next part. In October 2024, Rachel dropped a little backstory. She revealed that in the movie, her version of Snow White didn't just randomly get her name because of her appearance. Instead, she got it because of this whole intense backstory where she and her parents survived a snowstorm, and the name became a symbol of her resilience. Rachel even mentioned that this twist wasn't just random, but had actually been pulled from another version of the fairy tale that not a lot of people knew about. However, as if this wasn't bad enough, Rachel did something that basically made half the world hate her. She badmouthed the original Snow White film. Rachel, being young, outspoken, and very much from the 21st century, did not hold back. She made comments about how the original version felt outdated. She questioned why Snow White's whole personality seemed to revolve around waiting for some random guy to rescue her, saying that the cartoon was super old and clearly needed a little update. And when people joked about the new Snow White being too PC, she wasn't having it. She fired back that the character deserved more than just singing, "Someday my prince will come," and staring longingly into the middle distance. Then, at the D23 Expo in 2022, Rachel really laid it all out, and people were not ready for that. She basically said that the original came out in 1937, and it shows.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love.
She also joked that the prince in that movie was kind of a stalker.
Focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. Super weird. So we didn't do that this time.
Rachel said they scrapped that whole angle and that their new version of Snow White wouldn't revolve around some dusty old love story. They cast Andrew Burnap as the male lead. But Rachel was like, who knows, maybe all his scenes get cut? It's Hollywood, baby. Of course, this did not go over quietly. The internet exploded. Some people applauded her for trying to modernize the story, but others were furious. Rachel got slammed for making the story too feminist. And then there was this wave of people accusing her of pushing some kind of girl boss agenda. And that was only the beginning of the backlash, because some people thought that Snow White did not need any changes at all.
The amount of, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Leave it the alone. Yeah, that's it. If it ain't broke, break it. Leave these stories alone. By the way, if she never opened her mouth and she didn't do all this nonsense, people would have gone and watched the movie. They would have made their money, but then people would have been disappointed after the match.
It got so messy that even branding experts stepped in, like this strategist named Ashton Stein, who dragged Rachel by saying it sounded like she hadn't gone through proper media training before launching into a promo tour. And then, out of nowhere, the real twist came in. David Hand, the actual son of the man who co-directed the original 1937 Snow White, popped up and called the remake straight up insulting. He basically said that his dad and Walt Disney would be turning in their graves. But it didn't stop there. Conservative media saw an opening and just ran with it. The Daily Wire decided they were going to show Disney how it's done and announced their very own live-action remake called Snow White and the Evil Queen. And guess who was set to star in it? Brett Cooper, one of their commentators. The idea was to release it in 2025 and basically compete directly with Disney's more progressive version. But Brett Cooper left the Daily Wire in December 2024, and since then, there has been absolute radio silence. the whole thing just vanished. While all this chaos was unfolding, Rachel finally decided to speak out again. In October 2024, she gave an interview with Variety, and honestly, you could tell she was tired. She said she never meant to imply that love had no place in the movie. In fact, she confirmed that there is still a love story in the film, but it's just not the main event. She said it really hurt to have her words twisted and taken out of context, and even admitted some of her jokes didn't land the way she thought they would, but the damage was kind of done. Some people were already convinced she hated the original film, hated romance, and hated tradition.
What really shocks me about this story, Disney and all these media companies, they invest hundreds of millions of dollars into these projects, right? Have they ever thought about maybe like a little bit of vulnerability study, opposition research, that sort of thing before you go and hire some Zoomer who's a lunatic?
In August 2024, the teaser trailer dropped, but instead of just talking about costumes or castle sets, things took a sharp turn. Politics made the entire film go south. Within days, two major pro-Palestinian organizations, BDS and PACBI, announced they were calling for a full-blown boycott. Why? Because Gal Gadot, who plays the Evil Queen, served in the Israeli military and has been vocal about her support for Israel. That alone would have made headlines, but things got even messier once people realized that Rachel Zegler, our new age Snow White, had publicly supported Palestine. Now, imagine that. The lead heroine and the villain of the film standing on opposite sides of one of the most polarizing international issues of our time. Social media went wild. Hashtags started flying, boycotts trended in waves, and people were more focused on the politics behind the scenes than the actual movie. And just when it seemed like the controversy couldn't grow any more intense, word got out that Gal Gadot had received death threats due to her stance. It got serious enough that Disney had to step in and ramp up her security, making sure their Evil Queen was protected off-screen too. Despite all of this chaos and the clash of ideologies, the most unexpected twist was that Gadot and Zegler actually got along just fine on set. Rachel and Gal at premiere together. There were no icy silences and no side eyes across the makeup trailer, just two actresses doing their jobs and staying professional, proving that behind-the-scenes energy doesn't always match online narratives. But that wasn't the only boycott knocking at Disney's door. Enter the 2024 United States presidential election. The results came in, and while the country was still processing, Rachel Zegler decided to make her thoughts crystal clear. She posted a very direct message online that said, Donald Trump, followed by a less than subtle wish that Trump and his supporters never know peace. As you can imagine, that went over like a lead balloon. Republican supporters immediately began calling for yet another boycott of the film, furious over what they saw as disrespect and political hostility.
But when you come out and the freedom of speech was to condemn the very thing that you're paid to build? Are you kidding me?
Zegler, realizing things had escalated quickly, issued a public apology. She said she didn't mean any harm and tried to clarify her intentions, but the damage was already done. The internet never forgets.
I never want it to come off as me being ungrateful for the opportunities I have. I can also be having the greatest time and simultaneously wishing people would stop sending me death threats.
Meanwhile, in a completely different corner of the controversy web, another conversation was bubbling, one that had actually started way back in January 2022, and it was about the dwarfs in Snow White. That's when actor Peter Dinklage, known for his work as a performer with dwarfism, criticized Disney's decision to reboot Snow White at all. He dismissed it as a backward story and questioned why a film with such outdated tropes was even getting a remake. His remarks sparked immediate backlash, not from Disney, but from fellow actors with dwarfism. In response to Dinklage, Disney tried to soften the blow by saying they were taking a different approach this time and were consulting with members of the dwarfism community to avoid reinforcing stereotypes. That sounded promising until people started digging into what this different approach actually looked like. By July 2023, leaked set photos from Berkshire made their way online. And let's just say they raised more questions than they answered. Instead of 7 actors with dwarfism playing the iconic roles, the cast featured only one such actor, surrounded by 6 other performers of various ethnicities, a mixed group of men and women, none of whom had dwarfism. The backlash was swift. Critics online accused Disney of going so far in its attempts to be politically correct that it had looped all the way back around and erased opportunities for the very community it claimed to be helping. Disney tried to dodge responsibility at first, insisting the photos didn't show the final cast. But eventually, they confirmed that yes, the images were from production and the other actors were stand-ins. Though Martin Kleba, one of the only confirmed dwarf actors in the film, wasn't present in that footage. Actors like Jason Weeman Acuna, best known from Jackass, didn't hold back. He slammed Disney for casting what he called 7 average people, asking why they were replacing roles meant for dwarf actors. Dylan Hornswoggle Postal echoed those thoughts and even called out Dinklage directly, saying his comments might have cost other actors real jobs. There was a growing sense that Disney's attempt to modernize the story had resulted in an unintentional mess, where no one, not traditionalists, not progressives, and certainly not dwarf actors, felt truly represented.
And with Disney, you know the famous phrase, go woke, go broke? Right now, Disney, their big blockbuster movie has plummeted.
Then in October 2023, as part of a press push tied to the film's delayed release, Disney finally gave the public its first official look at the 7 dwarfs. And the big reveal? They were now fully computer-generated characters, modeled after their 1937 counterparts. The backlash to this move was a mixture of exhaustion and disappointment. After all the talk of inclusivity, reimagining, and consulting, the final decision was to simply animate the characters, effectively sidestepping the casting issue altogether. And if that wasn't enough, Disney made it a point never to call them dwarfs in any promotional material or dialogue from the film. Instead, they were simply referred to by name: bashful, doc, dopey, grumpy, happy, sleepy, and sneezy, without directly acknowledging the original identity of the group. All of these controversies culminated into the worst response Disney could have ever anticipated. After the film's release, Rotten Tomatoes came in first with the cold, hard numbers. Only 40% of the 247 critics gave it a thumbs up, which is not exactly what Disney expected. The average score hovered at a lukewarm 5.2 out of 10. Over on Metacritic, things didn't get any rosier. The film landed squarely in mixed territory with a flat 50 out of 100, based on 51 reviews. Basically, critics couldn't quite agree if this version of Snow White was a gentle upgrade or just a cinematic identity crisis. But the real fun came from the wildly different critic reviews. Some absolutely loved it, others couldn't wait to get the film over with. Nicholas Barber of the BBC pointed out that the story was a bit of a mess, with muddled tone and pacing that felt like it didn't know what it wanted to be. But weirdly, he still found that confusion kind of interesting. But Dan Rubins of Slant wasn't impressed, calling it a paint-by-numbers modernization of a story that was already starting to show its age. Amy Nicholson of the Los Angeles Times found it fascinating, but mostly as a case study in the contradictions of today's media landscape, like some magic mirror reflecting society's ongoing identity crisis. And over at RogerEbert.com, Neil Minow said the movie had a few functional parts, but just couldn't capture the sweetness or imagination of the original. Then came the real stingers. Peter Bradshaw at The Guardian called the film exhaustingly awful and slammed Zegler and Gal Gadot for giving what he described as the dullest performances of their careers. Johnny Oleksinski from the New York Post didn't hold back either, describing it as a lifeless, awkward mess that disappeared from memory as soon as the credits rolled. Tyler Tying of Discussing Film gave Zegler credit for carrying the film, but added that everything else, from the structure to the acting, was such a clumsy disaster that even Godot's unintentionally hilarious line deliveries weren't enough to save it. And to wrap it all up with a bittersweet bow, David Fear from Rolling Stone said the film might not be the worst live-action adaptation ever made, but it certainly came close to being the blandest. In the end, the fall of Snow White isn't just isolated. With it, Rachel's career has fallen, and it may never recover.